In Washington, a familiar but increasingly prominent voice of Iranian opposition delivered a stark appeal to the international community, framing the current moment as a decisive test for global resolve and moral responsibility. Speaking from the United States Capitol, Reza Pahlavi, the son of Iran's last monarch and a long-standing advocate for democratic change, urged world leaders to take concrete action against what he described as a central pillar of repression inside Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The remarks came as Iran continues to face deep internal unrest driven by a combination of political repression, economic pressure and widespread public frustration. For months, protests have rippled across cities and towns, uniting diverse segments of society from students and workers to women and pensioners in open defiance of the ruling system. The government's response has been swift and forceful, relying heavily on security forces to suppress dissent. Against this backdrop, Pahlavi positioned his message not as a call for abstract solidarity, but as a demand for specific targeted measures aimed at protecting civilians and weakening the machinery that enforces authoritarian rule. Reza Pahlavi said today, "I ask the world to do 6 things. First, protect the Iranian people by weakening the regime's repressive capacity, including targeting the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its command and control infrastructure." The statement was delivered calmly but firmly, underscoring a belief that symbolic gestures are no longer sufficient. In his view, the survival of the current system depends less on popular legitimacy than on the operational strength of its security institutions. Among those institutions, none looms larger than the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, commonly known as the IRGC. Formed in the aftermath of Iran's 1979 revolution, the IRGC has evolved into far more than a conventional military force. It operates as a parallel power structure with influence spanning defense, intelligence, internal security, foreign operations, and large sections of the economy. Over decades, it has embedded itself deeply within the state, acting as both guardian and enforcer of the political order. For protesters on the streets of Iran, the IRGC is widely viewed as the ultimate instrument of coercion. The entity that ensures dissent is met with surveillance, detention, and at times lethal force. Pahlavi's call to target its leadership was framed as a strategy to reduce the regime's ability to repress, rather than as a call for collective punishment. He argued that weakening the IRGC's command structure would directly translate into greater safety for ordinary Iranians who continue to risk arrest or worse by demanding change. The emphasis, he said, must remain on protecting people, not escalating conflict. The press conference marked one of Pahlavi's most explicit appeals for international coordination. While he has long advocated diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and political isolation of Iranian authorities, his latest remarks reflected a growing sense of urgency shaped by events on the ground. Across Iran, reports from activists and human rights groups indicate that security forces have intensified their response to demonstrations. Internet access has been repeatedly restricted, making it difficult for protesters to communicate or document abuses. Universities have been placed under heavy surveillance. Families of detainees have reported intimidation and lack of information about the whereabouts of loved ones. In this environment, Pahlavi sought to present himself as a conduit between voices inside Iran and decision-makers abroad. Speaking from exile, he acknowledged the limitations of his position, but insisted that international action remains a critical variable. He framed the protests not as isolated eruptions of anger, but as part of a broader historical trajectory, one in which Iranian society is steadily rejecting authoritarian rule and demanding accountability, dignity, and political choice. For many Iranians, particularly younger generations, the memory of the monarchy is distant or abstract. Pahlavi himself has emphasized that his role is not to restore the past, but to advocate for a future shaped by democratic principles and popular sovereignty. He has repeatedly stated that the form of Iran's future government must be decided by its people through free and fair processes. Still, his lineage gives him symbolic visibility at a moment when opposition forces inside Iran remain fragmented and heavily suppressed. no single leader has emerged from within the country, largely due to the risks associated with organising under constant surveillance. This vacuum has amplified the voices of figures abroad who can speak without immediate fear of arrest. In Washington, Pahlavi's message was calibrated for an international audience. He spoke in the language of human rights, rule of law and collective responsibility, concepts familiar to policymakers and diplomats, but rooted, he argued, in the lived reality of Iranians facing repression. He stressed that inaction carries its own consequences, allowing the security apparatus to operate without meaningful external pressure. He warned effectively grants impunity to those responsible for violence against civilians. At the same time, he was careful to distinguish between the Iranian state and the Iranian people. Throughout his remarks, he emphasised that the population should not bear the cost of geopolitical rivalries or diplomatic stalemates. Any measures taken, he argued, must be precise and aimed at decision makers, not society at large. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, he said, represents a clear focal point because of its central role in enforcing internal control. By targeting leadership networks and operational infrastructure, he suggested the international community could disrupt the chain of command that enables repression. The idea of targeting in this context was presented as political and economic pressure rather than indiscriminate force. Sanctions, travel restrictions, asset freezes and international legal mechanisms were implicitly framed as tools capable of constraining the IRGC's reach without escalating violence. While reactions to Pahlavi's remarks varied, they reignited debate about how far external actors should go in responding to Iran's internal crisis. Some policymakers argue that stronger action is necessary to deter abuses and support popular demands. Others caution that overt intervention risks reinforcing official narratives that portray protests as foreign-driven. Inside Iran, the authorities continue to reject external criticism, framing unrest as a result of hostile influence rather than domestic discontent. Officials have defended security measures as necessary to preserve stability, even as images and testimonies from the ground tell a different story. For protesters, the stakes remain intensely personal. Participation can mean expulsion from university, loss of employment, imprisonment, or worse. Yet demonstrations have persisted, fueled by a sense that the cost of silence are no longer tolerable. In this context, Pahlavi's appeal sought to bridge the gap between courage on the streets and leverage in international capitals. He argued that the bravery shown by ordinary citizens must be matched by decisive action from governments that claim to uphold democratic values. He also underscored the importance of information access. With repeated internet shutdowns inside Iran, he called for expanded support for technologies that allow people to communicate securely and bypass censorship. In his view, access to information is not a luxury, but a lifeline. The Washington appearance was not framed as a one-time intervention, but as part of an ongoing effort to keep global attention focused on Iran. Pahlavi has increasingly positioned himself as a spokesperson for a broad, non-ideological coalition centred on human rights and national self-determination. Whether that positioning will translate into tangible influence remains uncertain. Iran's political future is shaped by complex internal dynamics, including power struggles within the elite, economic pressures, and the resilience of civil society under oppression. External pressure alone is unlikely to determine outcomes, but it can shape the environment in which those outcomes unfold. What is clear is that the current moment has intensified scrutiny of the Islamic Republic's governing structures. The IRG, long influential behind the scenes, is now openly debated as a central obstacle to political reform. Calls to hold its leadership accountable are no longer confined to activist circles. They are increasingly voiced in diplomatic and policy discussions. As the press conference concluded, the tone remained resolute rather than rhetorical. Pahlavi did not claim to speak for every Iranian, nor did he present a detailed blueprint for transition. Instead, he focused on what he described as an immediate moral obligation, preventing further harm to civilians. By repeating his call for the world to act, he sought to impress upon his audience that history is shaped not only by those who wield power, but also by those who choose how or whether to respond. Reza Pahlavi said today, "I ask the world to do 6 things. First, protect the Iranian people by weakening the regime's repressive capacity, including targeting the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its command and control infrastructure." The words lingered as both an indictment and a challenge. For supporters, they captured the urgency of a population demanding freedom under immense pressure. For critics, they raised difficult questions about intervention, sovereignty, and unintended consequences. Yet beyond the debate, the reality inside Iran continues to unfold, shaped daily by acts of defiance and repression. As long as protests persist, voices like Pahlavi's are likely to remain part of the global conversation, pressing governments to decide whether they will remain observers or become active participants in one of the most consequential struggles in the region today.